Welcome to Impaler Gold, a wave-based score attack first-person shooter with light roguelike elements. Now, I initially wanted to call this game junk food, since it's quick, cheap, enjoyable but bad for you in large doses, and full of sharp objects. But in reality, Impaler has way too much soul to be junk food. It's a humble little game that squeezes a decent bit of depth and enjoyability out of a handful of simple mechanics. It's no reinvention of the wheel, and there are certainly aspects that could use improvements or tweaks, but as far as obscure games pulled from my Steam backlog go, this one was pretty great. I enjoyed my time with it, and I could imagine anyone who wants a quirky boomer shooter they can pick up and play would have a good time as well. It's pretty accessible, as you can purchase Impaler on both Steam and GOG. 5 American Earth dollars off sale, 2 on sale. I'd say it's a fair deal for either price. I got it as part of a Humble Bundle for even cheaper a good while back, so I'm pretty happy with that. From a technical standpoint, Impaler runs out of the box perfectly and has most of the configuration options I want to see. Since I'm currently on my 16x10 monitor arc thanks to a multi-day power outage, I do want to give special mention to the native 16x10 support. This game is also very stable and never crashed, jammed, or clearly bugged out in my playtime, so it's in a better technical state than Splinter Cell Conviction. Not too much more to add here, so let's get right into the meat and potatoes of it. Impaler throws you in with effectively no story or cutscenes. All you need to know is that you're John Impaler and there's a giant cool evil skull you need to stomp, so go impale a good few waves of bad guys and amass gold in the meantime. Impaler Gold is a very honest title in more ways than one. Now, it's worth mentioning that there are 2 modes, Campaign and Collectathon. I'll touch on Collectathon much later because it's a bit of a footnote. The focus of this video will be the campaign. Structurally, the campaign is a simple wave survival affair. Each wave of bad guys is interspersed with a store that you can buy mild upgrades from. Defeat bad guys, get coins, buy upgrades, and progress deeper into the campaign. It's a fairly satisfactory loop, even if it does have some hitches, which I'll discuss in due time. Now, an important thing to establish early on is that Impaler is a little bit of an oddball by FPS standards. At a glance, it may seem like it's a fairly hardline boomer shooter, what with its movement focus, fixed health bar, assortment of weapons, and mash of monsters with dodgeable attacks. The unexpected surprise is that, in a plethora of different ways, you are discouraged from mindlessly gunning down everything you see. Not that you can't shoot things, I mean, you can still win a guns-only playthrough, there's an achievement for it. It's just that a lot of the mechanics encourage you to be more creative and varied. While your guns do have unlimited ammo, they are instead limited by a heat meter. Fire too quickly and your gun overheats, preventing you from shooting for a short time. Weapons build up heat at an incredibly rapid rate, with the deepest mag, in quotes, you ever get being probably 20 or so shots. This is what firearms will be like in the future, folks. I get what you might be thinking, that frequently overheating weapons with small magazines sounds more annoying than anything else. Thankfully, the overheating is balanced out by the fact that you have numerous other means of dealing damage to enemies. The main gimmick of the game, it's literally titular, is your secondary weapon, the Impaler. It's a powerful, multifaceted weapon you can instantly whip out at any time by holding the right mouse button. Firing it causes spikes to emerge from the floor, dealing significant damage, stunning targets, and healing you on successful kills. Your primary weapon cools down while it's in your back pocket, so you can rapidly switch between the two in combat for powerful damage dumping. The Impaler itself can overheat too, but its overheat meter is fairly generous and frequent weapon swapping helps keep both your weapons in pristine shooty condition. Beyond being a decent close range secondary, the Impaler has strong utility uses. You can deny areas by getting the AI stuck on the spikes, sure, but it also provides a jump boost when fired under your feet. You can even shoot certain environmental objects into the air, a surprisingly valuable technique that is known as spiking in basketball. The jump boost from the Impaler in particular is pretty significant to the gameplay loop. You can use it to land on enemies' heads and kill them in the landmark platformer video game maneuver known as the Awesome Possum Trample. Not even just that, simply landing on the ground from a modest height creates an explosion that fires out a bunch of projectiles. Since there's also jump pads in the arena and purchasable upgrades for your jump, you have numerous means of unleashing the explosive slam. It's a very efficient and easy way to deal with groups, both severely damaging them and creating breathing room. I do admit I think jumping is rather overpowered since there's nothing that truly counteracts it. I guess flying enemies can be a pain to land on, and there is a small fundamental hitch I'll discuss later, but even the toughest enemies immediately fall down when you fall down on their head. You can absolutely do a jump damage only run. The final boss can only be defeated by jumping on his big head after all, where else would you land on him? But I do insist that the stomping mechanics are a bit overtuned, and the game favors you staying in the air a little too much. Despite that, the jump slam isn't a cure-all in normal practical play. Both exploding and flying enemies exist, and its AoE damage falls off on the hardest difficulty. This is why mixing and matching your attack types is important. Between a jump slam, impaler, and guns, you've got a flexible roster of attacks that excel in different situations. Head stomps are great for annihilating single targets or knocking back groups of trash enemies. Impaling is great for movement, controlling smaller crowds, and dealing sharp bursts of damage. And firearms light up their way by swatting flies, picking off or stunning enemies at a distance, and blasting explosive barrels. Individually, each of these are functionally simple, but when they're all combined together in actual gameplay, they make for surprisingly calculated and thrilling combat, especially on harder difficulties. I might downplay the role of guns in particular throughout this video. They sit in a somewhat awkward spot, but they are still a core component of the gameplay loop. It's mostly that impaling enemies is more strongly incentivized, and jumping on enemies' heads is extra funny for its one-shotting capabilities. You don't even need that much height because John Impaler's weighed down by all the spikes he carries around. To go back to ground level for a more grounded element of gameplay, Impaler features a shifting arena. It's always in this big, stony, rectangular church because this game really needed an extra map or two. But cover, enemies, and hazards spawn in different places with each wave. The arena can even transform mid-wave with new areas and enemy spawns emerging. This does come with the initial amusing annoyance of enemy pens spawning on top of you, but you do have the Impaler to jump with. With its decent variety of objects, enemies, and wave layouts, Impaler does manage to keep its one map feeling fairly varied and versatile. The environment itself is both an enemy and a weapon, a dichotomy I'm always a sucker for in games. The most obvious case of this is the explosive barrels that sporadically spawn in the arena. Kick them at the bad guys to deal, honestly, a bit less damage than I feel they should. You can upgrade them, but I'll come back to that shortly. And while the buzzsaws and laser grids can carve a turkey sandwich out of you, your enemies don't get any special favors there. Further compounding the push to master the movement are the obstructive walls, which are an extremely common sight. There's a weirdly high variety of obstructive walls, and some are worse than others. Some feel oppressive, really limiting your ability to maneuver and score, whereas others are just small nuisances designed to stall a player who hasn't adopted the bird play style yet. Pogoing over walls using the Impaler is such a vital technique to master, though even once you master that, the obstructions can be a problem while you're trying to play chalice golf. Yes, the chalice-shaped elephant in the room is a situation with these chalices. Barring those of you who are alt-tabbed, I hope I'm good background noise, you've almost certainly seen me punting these chalices around. These are prize boxes of sorts that need to be escorted to a designated yellow pedestal in the arena in order to be opened. They typically hold lots of gold and health pickups, though they can also fire out homing projectiles with a specific upgrade. Most waves have at least one of these, with it being possible to get up to 3 if you successfully bust open 2 of them before enemies stop spawning in for the wave. It's a cool way to encourage players to use the tools at their disposal to quickly and aggressively weave their way through enemies. The chalices also weave their way into the combat itself to an extent, as they respond to a lot of different player actions. A decent chunk of my interaction with these was kicking them, but punily punting these punitively is just one option. You can also shoot them, they're made out of Kevlar so it's okay, spike them into the air, or send them careening away with your jump blast. The pedestals that receive the chalices are very generous. They're like bowling with 1,000-foot high bumpers on. It's generous in an enjoyable way, and I can't help but find blasting a chalice into place from halfway across the arena to be fairly delightful. Oh, and you can splatter enemies with the chalice. That's pretty fun. I think the chalices really help tie Impaler's moment-to-moment gameplay together. For me, mixing all of my tools together to escort a chalice in the heat of battle represents a spike of enjoyment within waves. It's an interesting concept because it's a distracting, risky task done in exchange for considerable sums of gold used for upgrades. You might be turning your back on enemies or putting yourself in a bad position. The surprisingly dangerous wasp enemies only show up if you don't quickly break their eggs after they spawn. Do you prioritize eliminating them before they're a threat, or maxing out your cash from the wave. How much will you risk for that extra bit of gold? The Chalice Escort is ultimately one of those excellent systems that may sound daft from a distance, but actually ends up being surprisingly intelligent and engaging in practice, especially once you learn how to put the moves on the Chalice. I thought this was an awful mechanic in my first couple runs, yet it slowly dawned on me that this was perhaps the most engaged I've ever been moving a large object from place to place in a shooter. I wouldn't say that's like the highest praise in the world, let alone something I sought from a game, but it's definitely an impressive accomplishment nonetheless. The coins you get from the chalices can be exchanged for goods, though goods may be a strong word here. Interspersed between waves is a store, which offers you the opportunity to buy one of 2 randomly selected upgrades from a large pool. Though that's technically a bit deceiving, you can actually buy as many perks as your gold supply allows between waves, but each upgrade you buy linearly increases the price of all future upgrades, and of course you only get 2 choices, so your ability to curate your perks is somewhat limited. You can also choose to pass on the store for the time, allowing you to reroll a new duo of perks the next round. Since there's a decent few rounds that go by fairly quickly, you'll have plenty of opportunities to shop for perks. It's a fairly simple system, with a lot of the perks also being simple themselves. Expect most perks to be number tweaks like more max health, increased spike fire rate, weapons overheating slower, etc. Mild safe stuff. There are at least a handful of thematically more interesting perks in here. One I have a hard time passing up on is the gas spikes. These are honestly pretty overpowered and great for scoring. It's a cool perk because it offers unique functionality that opens the door for new strategies. Perks like this are rather scarce within the roster, but you can definitely have fun with the likes of triple jumping, bonus spikes upon overheat, and more explosive barrels, just to name a few. Now, the perk system does have some issues. It's in a very strange place in terms of design, where its flaws are largely not too harmful to the gameplay, but it's still clear that less thought went into it than any other aspect of the game. Well, maybe barring Collectathon Mode. I don't think I've ever passed up on upgrades as often as I have in Impaler, yet even if you pass up on a round of perks for a reroll the next round, all that really does is give you a small chance at getting a halfway decent perk next round. It's an awkward 3-way collision of upgrades costing gold, the pool being diluted with incredibly mediocre perks, and a select few good perks being very strong. There's barely noticeable boons, gold bonuses that provide no return if you don't obtain them early on, and rarely even outright detriments. It further doesn't help that the price to value ratio of a lot of perks tapers off hard as you get deeper into a run. Personally, I'm psychologically pushed away from a lot of upgrades because I can't help but think that 100 coins isn't worth it for, say, larger barrel explosions. And since a lot of perks are number tweaks with a layer of obfuscation to them, they aren't especially enticing on average. Some of these perks can be surprising, like the recoil reduction perk actually being freakishly good, but a lot of other perks are rather niche or borderline unnoticeable in gameplay. Don't expect Impaler to be breakable like it's a bottom after a nice dinner. It's pretty reserved by roguelike standards. There's no crazy builds or screen nukes here. Its strongest abilities are mild buffs, and there isn't much in the way of synergy between perks. I do occasionally like a roguelike that emphasizes players' skill above all else though, because it's nice to not have to worry about the flow of the game drastically slowing down or speeding up, purely because of how lucky I am. Lucking into immortality like I'm a billionaire in modern society isn't always what I want from a game, you know? Oh, and one more rather questionable choice is the fact that you're actively punished for starting the game out, as perk effects are mysteries until you buy them for the first time. You are at least told the category of the upgrade, but I still don't get the design intent here at all. It's just forcing players to gamble in a way that isn't befitting of the rest of the gameplay. I get that a lot of roguelikes post something similar on you by asking you to memorize what items do, something that only comes with playtime, but the way Impaler does this just feels like a cheap way to make your first few runs harder. At least this largely goes away with a few runs. Speaking of things that go away within a few runs and awkward transitions, your high score is likely to be bested more and more with each consecutive run. The scoring system isn't particularly robust, and there's nothing tied to it beyond your place on a global leaderboard, so it's just bragging rights. Impaler's scoring grades you based on gold collected and how spicy your means of defeating your foes is. Guns give you the least points, so if you want that high score, you better get used to dishing out rectal rearrangements. or barreling through them with barrels. That's a barrel of fun sometimes. This is probably a psychological part of reason I recommend against frequent gun use, since I did go out of my way to get high scores, so your mileage might vary. Regardless, I don't normally score runs, so I really can't tell you what makes for a good scoring system. I feel Impaler's scoring is decent for casual play, even if it prioritizes explosive barrels a little too much. The most optimal possible score run is likely a tedious hour of herding and whittling down cats, but that's just how it is with scoring in a lot of games, isn't it? Though I should mention that, as of posting this video, I have the 9th highest score on the planet. I challenge you to beat this score because I really don't think it would be all that difficult. The run was a bit unlucky and I didn't do particularly well in terms of collecting gold. I'm surprised I scored this high with such a run, so I'd like to see any dedicated gamers in the audience try to usurp my place. Maybe you'll figure out some new scoring tech or something, who knows? Just want to interrupt real quickly and say I beat my high score on accident while recording last minute extra footage, landing me in 8th place. No clue how this happened, but it is funny. I got a jump kill from shooting that guy to death. That counted as a head stomp. It's weird. Speaking of bad timing and even more awkward transitions, there's bullet time, a mechanic bound to the middle mouse button that I admittedly neglected to use. Not the first time, I suppose. There's 3 reasons for this. It doesn't last long, it has a long cooldown, and it tends to be oddly niche. It's a mix of it feeling too rare to use and too ineffective to be a last ditch, on top of it requiring upgrades to be effective, thereby making this rare power-up a drain on your perk economy. Without those perks, it seemingly slows you down as much as the enemies. It ends up feeling rather underwhelming. Now, I'm personally glad that bullet time is a rare power-up because constant access would probably make the game a slow-paced cakewalk. Still, it's too weak for how rarely you get to use it, and way too little is in place to encourage its use. The timing never felt right, you know? I can see where bullet time might shine, but I did just fine on maximum difficulty without it. Expect to barely ever see me use bullet time in the rest of my footage. I had to go back in later in editing to record this stuff. It's a footnote of a mechanic, and it doesn't negatively affect my opinion of the game much, even if it is another blemish on a perk roster. I guess that system just can't catch a break. But hey, at least I can skip out on the slow-mo perks when I don't want them. That is to say, most of the time. So at least that's nifty. To top all of those mechanics off, you have a decent selection of weapons, even if they are watching from a distance in their cuck chair. As stated before, these things overheat faster than a polar bear inside of an active volcano. I'd normally call them fairly weak for this, but overheating isn't as big of a deal as it sounds. Your primary weapon vents while you have the Impaler out, and vice versa, and it only lasts for a couple seconds. Overheating is simply a way the game encourages you to both mix up your means of damaging foes and to discourage you from wildly spraying and praying. It's a bit inelegant, but it does the trick well, and it communicates Impaler's intentions very quickly and clearly, so I think it's fine. That aside, Impaler has 8 guns to choose from, with it forcing you to commit to a specific gun for the entirety of each run. There are unlocking requirements on these, but they're fairly reasonable, as I got all of them within about 5 runs. You've got a handful of conventional firearms like the Perforator machine pistol, the Shredder assault rifle, the AC-50 sniper rifle, and the boomstick. They're all fairly standard FPS fare. If you want something a little less conventional, you can also wield a plasma rifle, a rocket launcher, whatever the Harvester is, or this Terraria sword. I can't just let the sword sit in the back of your mind, so I'll say it's a pretty interesting and powerful weapon. It hits hard, shoots out a horizontal wave of projectiles with each swipe, and it grants a speed boost on attack, which opens the door to some Vermintide core move tech. It's definitely the most unique weapon on offer, and it strikes a good balance between being viable and gimmicky. Its only weakness is flying enemies, but if you're good with the movement, that's not an issue. Less unique weapons are still viable, with the Perforator and Shredder being extremely dependable. I greatly appreciate that the default weapon, the Perforator, isn't a complete throwaway. I even used it in the run where I made it to the top 10 on the leaderboard, so it's a pretty good choice. Fast, surprisingly accurate, and great for chipping down enemies. I like it, even if it's nothing particularly special. The only two weapons I think aren't particularly good are the rocket launcher and the AC-50 sniper. A lot is going against the rocket launcher. The self-damage, the small blast radius, the slowest projectile speed in the game. It's not optimal, though it's not awful. It's usable and its damage per shot is decent, but most other weapons outperform it. Rocket jumping is also a bad idea because you've got the Impaler right there. Why blast your own ass when you can just safely prod it instead? On the other hand, the AC-50 sniper rifle sits in an incredibly strange place, being decent at lower difficulties yet being abysmal at the hardest difficulty. It starts missing out on a lot of crucial damage breakpoints, particularly important ones like one-shotting flying skeletons. That's a horrible problem for a gun to have, real life or video game. So it probably ends up being the worst weapon in the game, even if it starts out pretty good. This is the first game where I'll ever insist that the sniper rifle should be buffed without feeling a lot of shame. So that's kind of impressive in its own right. The remaining three guns are relatively middle of the road. The shotgun's just okay, which is probably a little disappointing to hear, but they can't all be winners. The Harvester is a double-barrel shoddy looking doohickey. I don't know the best way to describe it. It's kind of like it fires slugs, but they spread out once they hit a surface. Its big gimmick is just bouncy projectiles, which isn't super practical. I don't know. I don't think it's particularly better or worse than a regular shotgun. Finally, the plasma rifle is fine, serving as a more unwieldy but harder hitting version of the rifle. It escapes mediocrity through its unique plasma grenade upgrade, which is one of the hardest hitting things in the entire game, even if it also exponentially multiplies the unwieldiness. It's a fun trade-off, though I do think it's probably how the gun should be by default. Speaking of which, this is a good time to bring up the weapon locked perks. The weapon you choose has 1 to 3 perks associated with it, which can be acquired in the store between rounds, same as any other upgrade. These perks provide more significant and abstract bonuses that often can't be acquired through other means, such as burst fire functionality or piercing. Though a couple weapons share a few of these, most of them are unique to the weapon you chose, so you can't get a burst fire rocket launcher or anything like that. I do welcome these perks because on paper, they're great deviations from the more generic stat boosts that other perks provide, and they lend a lot of unique identity to each weapon. It's just too bad that these perks are among the most questionable in the game. A lot of their effects just aren't super helpful, sometimes even verging on being actively detrimental. Buckshot being converted to slugs is not an upside, not to me at least. Slug shotguns feel primordially wrong to me, like cracking open an egg and finding a human foot inside. The biggest head scratchers are the burst fire conversions for the automatic weapons, which offer no actual benefit in exchange for 3-round bursts of downsides. These really should dramatically increase the effective magazine capacity or reduce the recoil, just anything to make them feel half decent. It's worth making it clear that burst fire doesn't render these guns unusable, just unwieldy. These guns rapidly overheat without trigger discipline, and fully auto is typically more suitable for what the game throws at you. I may have some vague anti-burst fire bias in general, but I don't think it's that radical to say that Impaler's take on these needs a couple rounds of fine-tuning. Those aforementioned upgrades are the big stinkers, but many of the other weapon upgrades are either forgettable or niche. I think these perks in general could use another balance pass or even integration into their respective weapon. They're at least largely inoffensive, and the biggest offense of the system is probably the fact that you might unexpectedly get ambushed with burst fire in a run at some point. It's not a run ender, but it's borderline a power down. The roguelike cookie crumbles like that sometimes, though this is very clearly not intended to be as massive of a nerf to the player as it is.
I can take it! I can take it!
Using those weapons and their quirky upgrades, you get to battle a fairly simple but varied selection of monsters. If you've got a decent handful of shooters under your belt, Impaler's enemy roster will feel very familiar. There's your typical melee cannon fodder, middle tier enemies that shoot at you, and flying skeletons that machine gun you from a distance. Video game staple, that last one. A few of these are a bit more unique. The wasps are rather annoying, but the dilemma of either taking them down before they become a threat or harvesting chalices is a good one. The giant stone heads are a genuinely interesting enemy. Very high priority, extremely disruptive under the right circumstances, and critically weak to being stomped. I mean, that's almost every enemy in the game, but still. And the enemies mounted on top of the retracting towers are a fun idea and a good way to reinforce Impaler jumping into the player. These guys are one of the few times where guns are warranted, because shooting them puts them into a fairly prolonged stun state, low on the ground. Otherwise, your most significant incentive to use guns comes in the form of shooting barrels and flying enemies. So, like in real life, guns are best used for fly swatting. It's also worth mentioning the protective shields that enemies sometimes spawn in with. This is a rather strange mechanic, being the most substantial form of counterplay to your jump attacks present. These shields absorb a decent chunk of damage, even being able to absorb a successful head stomp. But since they break after absorbing one jump, a shield just means you'll have to stomp on the bad guy's head twice. It's an understandable inclusion, even if it ultimately ends up feeling like a band-aid solution to the player's ability to literally stomp everything in sight. There are also elite variants of enemies as an additional mix-up, though they're mostly just souped-up versions of basic enemies, sometimes with slightly different behaviors or a new attack. Not a whole lot to say about them, all things considered. However, I do really appreciate that the higher-ranking elite enemies have unique sprites. It's a nice little extra mile to go for these guys, with their sprites having a more imposing feel in addition to being easy to identify at a distance. The latter of which especially is a very respectable aspect of a shooter's art direction. Speaking of the visual design, I think it's decent for what this game is. The sprite work is pretty good. I want to say it's rough around the edges, but it's rough because it replicates a lot of the feel of a 2.5D FPS from the 90s while also having an extra coat of polish. So this roughness actually works in the aesthetic's favor. I'm quite fond of the mildly silly, softcore sci-fi weapon designs. Each weapon manages to have a lot of distinctive personality to it, and even the more generic weapons still have a unique touch to them. The monsters are decently realized especially. I think the 90s cheese shines through the strongest with the monsters. I don't know a good way to put this, but this mash of monsters gives me the vibe of Halloween. Every time I launched this game, I immediately felt my Halloween spirit level rise. That's definitely a great feeling for your game to invoke, though I do ponder whether or not it was intentional. The Halloweeniness aside, identifiable silhouettes, color variety, and a 90s throwback edge all combine to give the enemy design some genuine punch. The only thing I dislike about the sprite work is just the problem that enemies are 2D sprites that face you at all times, so it can occasionally be awkward to judge the depth of a head stomp. I guess it's the lesser of the two ways the game bounces out jumping on heads. It's still some great sprite work, it just has like mildly annoying gameplay consequences. Beyond the sprite work, the highlight of the art direction, to me, is the colored lighting. Impaler oozes a specific style, something like that of Doom 64. I think it looks surprisingly good, and I mostly just can't help but wish for more of it. I'd like to see more of this outside of the big stone church and floating stone islands. The abstract nature of the maps is cool, but is this really all we get? The fact that there's no alternative maps for the main campaign is a bit of a tragedy. I'd go as far as saying that having only one map is probably the biggest blemish on the entire experience. The only room in the campaign is rectangular and stony, much akin to the way I like my women and my coffee and my men. In terms of sound design, Impaler fares decently well. I think some sounds are a little weak or subdued, like how the Shredder sounds like it could be a paintball gun, or how kills using the Impaler don't really evoke the vibe of a horrific weapon that rearranges organs in an aggressive manner. Still, there's plenty of sounds with bite, like the generic enemy kill sound, a thud from landing a big stomp, or when a slime gets obliterated. I did just say the Impaler doesn't sound meaty enough, but to be fair, its firing sound is permanently burned into my brain, so I guess that counts for something. I'm just gonna inelegantly transition into a demo of the sound design, so have fun. Overall, it's one of those soundscapes that's better in action than when you're being vaguely nitpicky about it in a video review. It's a little hard to describe, but there's a decent sense of fullness to the combat soundscape where it all comes together very well in actual gameplay. The chaos factor is well balanced here, where it's never overwhelming, but it still manages to sound fast-paced and dense. Even some great games can feel like their soundscape turns to noise sometimes, and Impaler just doesn't have that problem. It also maintains that old-school FPS vibe with the sound design, with the only thing missing being enemies that repeatedly groan at you with cheesy stock monster sound effects. But that's by no means essential. It could end up making the soundscape too cluttered anyways. Looking back on it later on in editing, the most significant problem I have is with the sound of the guns, which all need a bit more volume and bass. It's not a huge issue, especially considering how this game plays, but I prefer my guns to sound like they sling hot metal at the speed of pain, you know? Regardless, I've been holding off on the biggest way Impaler tickles the aural gland, the music. This soundtrack is actually pretty great. It's this synthy retro action music that accompanies the gameplay surprisingly well. If you've been paying attention to the background music, you've been hearing it throughout most of this video. Personally, I expected Impaler to have something more gothic or metal, especially after the sinister title theme, but this is a highly welcome twist. A very respectable branch off the beaten path. As a nice little bonus, you can download the soundtrack for free on Steam. They're just giving it away. Wait, they really are. If you don't plan on snatching this game, I'd still recommend giving the soundtrack a listen. I think it's pretty good stuff. But now I have to address something I'm less positive towards. Collectathon Mode. You've probably noticed some standout pieces of footage that are not inside of the giant rectangular battle cathedral. All of my gameplay on these floating islands is from Collectathon Mode. The goal of this mode is simple: grab every time pickup and defeat every enemy on the stage before the timer runs out. So I guess it's a bit of a kill-actathon mode as well. I'm allowed one bad pun per video. Anyways, after every completed area, the map transforms into a new one, which is a cool effect by the way. There are 14 maps in total, and they are vaguely ordered in terms of escalating complexity and difficulty. While the combat encounters aren't too hard, you're working against fairly restrictive timers in some of these, so you are pushed to go as fast as possible. If you want a good time, planning a route, juggling combat with collecting items, and using every bit of move tech you can muster are all vitally important. A lot of what I have said about the gameplay still applies, as it's roughly the same combat transitioned into a different format. The big mechanical difference is the lack of perks, which also entails the lack of gold in stores. So there really isn't progression in Collectathon Mode beyond moving stage to stage. The disappointment I have in that fact might just be the roguelike perk lust within me boiling over. I don't know. You also get to swap out your weapon in this mode, which is something that doesn't happen in the main campaign, though I personally just committed to whatever weapon I chose to start with because I'm a little stubborn like that. Now, I'm inherently ambivalent on Collectathon Mode overall. I'm not a big fan of this specific type of time trial mode. Impaler is an arena shooter roguelike at heart, so it doesn't do as well with these more linearly structured encounters. Your kit also pushes you more towards vertical movement, yet these maps are typically extremely horizontally oriented. Now, there is obscure horizontal move tech that I haven't really mentioned up to this point, particularly weak bunny hopping and wall jumping. The more notable of these two is wall jumping, because that's kinda just a thing that you can do that I don't think the game mentions anywhere. It does help with speed in some places in Collectathon, but it's wildly impractical most of the time and wins you little more than style points. I appreciate those, but in this case, I don't know. I imagine mastering the bunny hop and wall jump are probably necessary for topping the leaderboards here, but for casual play or just beating the par time, they're not necessary. I don't have a huge problem with this. In fact, if anything, I actually wish the game gave me more incentive to use these little movement tricks. Collectathon Mode could have been something special if these were more important, at least for casual play. Beyond the missing potential, there's other oddities with this mode that I'm not too fond of. The difficulty's all over the map, with courses 5 and 12 being miles harder than all of the others. Just about every reset I had was on one of those two stages. In comparison, the final couple stages are among the easiest and most forgiving on offer. Difficulty fluctuations are fairly understandable in a mode like this, in fact they happen in the main campaign too, but these fluctuations are gargantuan and I feel like they should have been easily caught in playtesting. And beyond a stage 5 difficulty spike wasting time, this mode quite literally wastes some of your run's time. Both the transitional period between maps and the ending fade out count as part of your final time. I think that's rather cruel, especially the slow ending fade out. You really shouldn't have to account for that. Plus, while I do think the map transitions look awesome, they're about 10 straight seconds of dead air in a speedrunning centric campaign. That clock is still ticking, this is part of your run's time. It has this stop-and-go sluggishness that I never felt with the downtime between waves in a main roguelike campaign. Lastly, this mode is pure memorization, and I'm not a fan of anything that relies so strongly on memorization. I talked about that before at length in my Like Dreamer video. I can be okay with memorization in small bursts or if I can still largely improvise my way through, but when I'm constantly fighting against a clock, the part time is 13 minutes, and I need to do it all in one borderline flawless go? Nah, this ain't my speed. Like how Speed 2 cruise control isn't my speed, though to be fair, Collectathon Mode isn't anywhere near as insulting. Despite all of that, I can't really hold the existence of Collectathon against Impaler, because this is a bonus that they patched in later in development. It's in weird territory. It's a respectable attempt to vary up the gameplay, yet I really wish the resources went into the roguelike campaign instead. There's definitely a certain demographic of people who would find this to be the more appealing mode, and I'm not one of those people. Still, it's an additional mode they added to the game for free, and those level transitions are pretty fun, so I'll give its inclusion bonus points regardless. With all that said, I'll start with my concluding thoughts. Overall, Impaler is a great humble title to snatch. It's good for a handful of hours of fun, and I had a great time learning its mechanics and creating a fairly optimal score run. Again, this score shouldn't be hard to beat. That's a challenge I issue to you, should you decide to snatch this. Even if score isn't a priority for you, Impaler Gold is a rock-solid arena shooter that doesn't ask for a spectacular amount of time nor brain power. So if a good short-term FPS sounds like your speed, this is definitely worth a buy, even off sale. I don't have too much to add unless I want to sound like a broken record, so I'll hop straight to accolades. First up, cheap and filling. This is a pretty straightforward accolade that I can see myself handing out again in the future. Impaler's dirt cheap and enjoyable for what it is. It accomplishes what it sets out to do, and it satiated my desire for a new, replayable arena shooter. For $5 or even less on sale, you really can't go too wrong with this one. Secondly, another broadly applicable accolade, deserves expansion. The foundation of Impaler is great. It's a compelling bite-sized FPS about juggling chalices and slaying enemies in unconventional ways. It's just that I wish that there were more to it. More maps, perks, maybe even a few more weapons would all go a long way. The Collectathon mode is a nice attempt to mix things up, though I honestly think the effort should have been put into more campaign maps instead. An arena that reconfigures itself like this would have been genuinely great in a main campaign. Oh well, I suppose more than anything else, I'd just like to escape the grey cathedral corridor. That'd be really nice. For the final accolade, first person only sometimes shooter. It's not often that I see a wave-based first-person shooter that frequently discourages you from just shooting enemies. Between the scoring system, how powerful alternative means of taking down enemies are, and how fast the guns overheat, it's rather unique how much firearms are downplayed here. It's not to say they're unusable, and admittedly I did play for score, which discourages gun usage. It's just that a lot of aspects of this game's design discourages spraying and praying, asking for a smarter and more reserved approach to firearms than most other similar games. Again, I can see this being a turnoff for some, and it's not too clearly telegraphed by the game's store page, so it's definitely of significant note. You're asked to adjust your mindset a little, to view guns as a tool in your toolbox rather than a cure-all. I think it's a refreshing spin on the shooter formula, and one that adequately rewards you for embracing its quirkiness. The game design is good, and its strengths kept me coming back for more, even if it's arguably a bit of a radical oddball. It's truly the updated fractal block world of wave-based first-person shooters. What did I, when I wrote this script, mean by that? Anyways, that's all for this episode. Once again, Patreon support is highly welcomed, and I do promise I'll expand upon a Patreon benefit soon. I'm hoping to start picking up uploading again, since it's been a while since my Sonar Shock video. I have a decent few things I would like to make. I'll likely create a few shorter videos for the sake of a more consistent upload rate, and also to help myself readjust to making these. Big projects have been very fatiguing, so I hope this is understandable. That's about it, so I'll see you next time, likely for, yep, you guessed it, a puzzle game. Have a good one.